The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everybody. Another beautiful Tuesday here in Wisconsin. It's now actually 25 degrees, so it's a little bit colder than it was 2 weeks ago when I was on. So we had our first snow last week, and so hey Scott, we got Scott Matchett like Hatchet, he told me. So I got to remind you, we have Scott Matchett on with us today. Scott is from the AILSA Group. And we're going to talk today on mobile device security and expense management challenges and solutions. And Scott would like to welcome you. Thanks for stopping with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Chris.
Yeah, no problem, man. No problem. We're Scott actually met him. Actually, he picked up the phone and called me after we have a mutual client that said, "Hey, I think you guys should talk." And I think that was Jerry, right? Jerry,
yeah, it was Gary Glish, that's right.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Gary Glish, not Jerry Hahn. There's two guys that I know, yeah. So, and those guys are on our cloud solution, and I think they really like that. Thought Scott and I should talk, so we've been talking and decided to do a webinar together. So I think we're both pretty excited about this. And it's very interesting because today's topic is something that is pretty near and dear to me. I've had a smartphone for, probably was one of the first people I know, being a kind of a tech head. I've had a smartphone forever. I think my first smartphone was the Palm Trio. You remember the Palm Trio, Scott? You probably do.
I do.
And yeah, so it's something that has been a challenge over time. So before we get into that too far, Scott, why don't you give me a little bit of a background on yourself and what the AILSA Group is and what that's all about.
Absolutely. So the AILSA Group has been around since 2003, and that date, of course, predates the whole conversation we're having today around mobile security. So when we set out, we really were doing exclusively expense management, expense reduction services geared to make sure that our clients were not being misbilled, overbilled, or treated unfairly in any way by their carriers. And in 2003, a lot of those conversations were heavily slanted towards fixed voice, so we're talking about POTS lines and circuits and that kind of thing. And as time went on, the focus of those conversations shifted more and more towards mobility, to the point where we needed to really help our clients in other ways within the mobility umbrella. And that's how the mobile device security practice was born. And now that tends to be the chief concern or most pressing concern that we find on the minds of many CIOs and other C-level people that we talk to is, how am I going to deal with these smartphones coming into the enterprise? I can't keep them out anymore. I don't really want to keep them out from a productivity point of view, but at the same time I really don't know how to secure them, and that's where we come in.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's been a very interesting little relationship for us so far, because when we first started talking, I went and looked at, I'd say, well, probably three-quarters of our clients, and about three-quarters of them are what I would consider the small to medium-sized business, which is pretty much 250 seats and under. And a lot of them, in fact, I'd say a majority, which would probably be in the 90 to 95% range, had no mobile device management whatsoever. There's a couple that have the BlackBerry Enterprise server from back in the day. They still have that, but so we're going to get into that a little bit today. This isn't going to be a super long session just because we don't have a ton of content depending on what questions we have, but we have a good amount of attendees, so we'll just go ahead and move forward. So Scott, let's talk a little bit about what MDM or mobile device management is and why it's important. I'll let you kind of go ahead and take those top two bullet points there and see what you can talk about.
Sure. So when you hear the words mobile security, it can mean a number of different things, and I don't want to let the scope get so broad that it gets confusing and overwhelming. So for today, I wanted to focus on the element of it that pertains to MDM and then things that are immediately around MDM, and that in itself is a buzzword that stands for mobile device management. And mobile device management basically means a solution, usually a software solution procured from a third party, aimed at securing smart devices. So that can be tablets or phones, and really the main drivers are the iOS or Apple phones and the variety of Android devices that are out there, both on the phone and tablet side. And you know, there's a variety of reasons this has become important. The hot topic now is bring your own device. Should we let employees bring their own device? If we do, what does that look like? Can they do everything everyone else can do? Can they only do a subset of those things? Can they run any applications that they want? How do I make sure that they're connecting to my network securely? How do I deal with content that might be residing on those devices in the event that those devices are lost? You know, and basically, what do I want to allow and not allow? And once I decide that, how can I control it in some sort of fashion that doesn't take away from my resources and the mission-critical tasks that my staff has to do? So also contributing to that are a few other things. The death, I'm calling it the death of BlackBerry. They're not dead yet, but we're seeing a very decided migration away from BlackBerry devices into these other devices, and again, mostly Apple and Android, sometimes Windows Mobile. We see a consumer-driven market here, whereas before it was really a technology and a controls-driven market by IT, who said, this is what we allow. If you don't like it, it doesn't matter. This is our policy. Today, consumers are winning that battle, and they're saying, this is the technology we want to use. Oftentimes, it's C-level people saying, this is the technology I want to use, and therefore, it's coming into the organization whether or not IT likes it, you know, or would rather have it another way.
Yeah,
And then
so
sometimes we go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, so what do you think about the whole, you know, the big deal that's really coming along these days is what's called BYOD, or the bring your own device scenario. I think your slide here is assuming that the business is providing that mobile device, and I feel that, you know, we've I'd say out of all of our clients, over half are allowing their end users to bring their own device and use it for work use.
Absolutely.
So how does that relate?
Yeah, it plays in a couple of different ways, Chris. There's kind of the all-in way where a company might decide, I'm going to just get rid of company-owned devices entirely and just go to BYOD, and all the devices that are in our fleet are going to be owned by the individuals, and we maybe will have a stipend program where we reimburse them a flat amount. Maybe we'll reimburse them for everything usage-wise, or maybe we won't reimburse them at all depending on what their job title and description is. And that kind of decision has obvious policy ramifications. It also has expense ramifications, which is why we help clients on both ends of that. And believe it or not, in some cases it is not a financially wise decision to convert to a bring your own device policy, at least in its entirety, and we'll help clients make that decision and crunch those numbers to see if it does or doesn't make sense if they want us to. But I do agree that in most organizations, some flavor of BYOD is going to be inevitable, so we need to deal with it.
And it's definitely depending on what I've seen is it totally depends on the size of the client and their industry. So if you're in the financial planning world and they're going to be doing any type of content on their device that's going to relate to confidential information, regardless of how big your company is, the policy should be company-issued phone because it's controllable versus end user bringing in their own phone, which means potential security breach, very similar to medical or, you know, possibly even law. It was actually interesting because I sat down with a law firm last week, I think Wednesday or Thursday, and one of their discussions was, hey, we have an end user that has their phone here, or not an end user, but one of our partners has their phone here, and it's their own personal phone, so a BYOD scenario, bring your own device. How does this relate to security and confidentiality? So that was one of their questions that they had because they had heard that in a CLE course that attorneys are required to take. Any thoughts on that?
Not any direct thoughts. I'm not surprised. I mean, the BYOD is coming from so many different angles, and the compliance angle is another one. So depending on the type of organization that you're in, as you mentioned, the size of it and the industry might be important, and then each of the industries has potential compliance factors that they need to consider. And the more compliance typically leads to the more control the organization has to maintain, which then typically means that you're going to have less of an appetite to go towards any sort of full-blown BYOD practice. But even those organizations will probably need to allow some, and they need to then have policy in place to make sure that even though it's a minority, that those BYOD devices are still controllable, and that we know about them, and that we know what they're able to do and not do.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about the compliance factors. What industries do you know that are actually bound by HIPAA? What SOX is actually Sarbanes-Oxley. That is a government-driven type policy. Can you give us a little bit of discussion on exactly what I just asked? Which actual industries are bound by whatever rules they might be? Which is going to be the HIPAA or the Sarbanes-Oxley scenario?
Sure. So when it comes to the direct compliance, HIPAA obviously is a healthcare concern, and so anyone who's delivering healthcare services is going to be, to at least some degree, bound by those rules. And Sarbanes-Oxley not as far along as that. I think HIPAA is more clear today. Sarbanes-Oxley, I've actually got a little bit of a background in that as well from a past life, and the whole concept here is to make sure that any sort of financially critical data or information is being secured so that it doesn't fall into the wrong hands and become available to those who shouldn't know it. Mobile security is a new enough concept that SOX audits have really not started encompassing it yet, but we know it's coming. When is it coming? Probably in the next year or two, depending on when your audit is scheduled for. But we know that it is coming, and the same types of things that IT controls have had to consider in the past, like password compliance for my financial applications, or making sure that reports are encrypted if they have and contain financially critical data. Those are going to spill over very soon into the mobile world as well. So industry specific, not really, but really anybody who's got a need to protect financially critical data is in scope on the SOX side. And then from there, we may not be citing specific compliance rules, but anybody who's got legally sensitive data is another obvious target where they're pretty much going to make a decision. We have to do something about this problem. It's not an option. It's not a nice to have. It's really something that we have to do. So industry-wise, the obvious ones are healthcare, financial, and legal. And then from there, it's up to every organization to make a decision. How important, how sensitive is our data? What would happen to our organization if certain things fell into the wrong hands, if a device were to become stolen or if a device were to become lost or forgotten? Those are the main considerations that every organization has to sort of consider.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Just the looking at the scenario yourself and saying, hey, if Joe's phone was stolen or lost, what's our plan and policy for taking control of that phone? And let's assume the worst case scenario, what's the impact going to be? So okay, that's good feedback. So we're going to go ahead and segue right into that scenario with the driving factors towards mobile device management. Obviously, we see a couple things focused here. Let's talk first about security. We were talking a little bit about that already, but one of the things that people don't realize is it's not so much the thought of mobile device management comes way more from the scenario of taking not predictable environments and then group controlling them. Can you talk a little bit about the security side of things? And if you don't want to elaborate too much on that, you don't have to, because I know a lot of people understand that. But I think seeing things like selective wipe and rooted devices and rogue devices, those kind of things are new to most people. So if you could just kind of focus on that a little bit and talk a little for us.
Yeah, well, I'll talk about it in kind of less technical terms. The security conversation is broken down into 4 or 5 main components. The first one is if the device winds up in the hands of someone other than the owner of the device or the person I assign that device to, what would happen? And generally, most organizations conclude that I would like to be able to lock that device at least, or in some cases, if I haven't been able to locate it or find it within a certain amount of time as your policy would dictate, I want to be able to wipe the content on it. Now, there are some things that you can do without a third-party MDM to wipe data. However, it's not very selective. It doesn't enable you much control, and it basically just allows you to restore a device to its factory settings, which may not be desirable, and in some cases it may not even be legal to wipe all the information, especially when you consider you're wiping out somebody's personal contacts and calendar. It's possible emergency contacts are listed in that list, so you have to be very, very careful if you're not selectively wiping data, and that's one of the reasons that MDM has become a sort of an important conversation.
Now, does that, real quick, expanding on that, does that apply to even company-owned phones? So let's say in my environment, I have 4 cell phones for Tech Squad here that we provide to our staff. if they choose to put their own personal content on those cell phones and we decide, it gets lost and we wipe it, am I responsible for, or you mentioned personal data or legal aspects of that. What's the, and this is more me, business owner, asking that question than it is webinar guy. So
it's a gray area. There hasn't been a lot of case history on this yet in terms of what would happen and what the liability of the company is. My opinion on it is it's going to be immediately traceable back to what your policy states and how clearly you've stated policy in terms of what employees can and can't do with personal data on their corporate phone and what they can and can't expect in terms of loss of data on their corporate-owned phone. We all know they're going to be doing some personal things on it. And I think you need to be very clear as to your policy. So you're correct. I think where you're going with that is correct, which is I have more flexibility probably to wipe out an entire device if it's corporate owned than I would if it's personally owned. But even there's a reason to be careful about that.
Yeah, because it's funny because in the laptop world we also provide laptops to our people, and it's a scenario of what do we do in the scenario that it's lost? We have a couple different things for managing all that stuff, but having it all in a completely cohesive single environment is very difficult to do, even from our standpoint. So that's kind of why I'm engaging you. So glad to hear that. So let's move on to management and control, and let's talk a little bit about mobile device management and how it should be managed and how this should be controlled through one tool and the benefit. Obviously, I think we can understand the benefits of that, but let's have you talk a little bit about that.
Sure, and then just to close the loop on security, there are a couple other quick concerns with people tampering with operating systems, and you hear the term jailbroken, you hear the term rooted. Rogue devices are ones that haven't been registered in our fleet. We maybe don't know who they are. All of these are types of devices and types of users who we want to make sure aren't connecting to our company network and are accessing our company data via these devices, and all of those things are additional ways that that MDM comes into play. But you're right, it goes into more than security, it goes into ease of management. So the nice thing about having MDM in place is it gives you one way to manage all of your devices, even across multiple operating systems, through one tool and one set of policies that you establish within the MDM panel. So that sometimes, I've actually seen certain installations that we've done where clients are driven exclusively by this particular issue. Those are obviously multi-OS and large volumes of users in those circumstances, but it can be quite a time savings for an IT department and to be able to offload that level of control.
Yeah, I think it's a big deal that companies don't even really think about. I think a lot of our clients do not think about it. I know there's multiple that we're going to be engaging with you, Scott, and I know that it's not even on their radar. So that's really good. So also, talking about the management and control, talking about moving on to the application management, what the blacklist, whitelist auditing is, some benefits of that, and just expand on that a little bit. And then I'm going to have a couple personal questions for you on that as well.
Sure. So here we're really talking about what can you put on that device and what can't you, and also what do you have to have on the device. So all these things can be automatically audited and even managed to the point where you can install applications through the right MDM solution. So let's say I'm a company that has a certain portion of my workforce is mobile. You're going to want to make sure certain applications are on any device that you issue. That might be some sort of mobile timekeeping thing. It might be a mobile application that you have that you need for CRM purposes or logging other critical information related to your client. We see mobile healthcare applications popping up all over the place for those mobile services or medical services that are delivered in a mobile fashion. And you can administer through MDM those applications by making sure that those are not only present but are up to date and current in terms of version through an MDM tool. And then the flip side's true. You might say that we don't trust these particular applications and you might want to ban them. Certain games, certain other ones that are known to have security risks, or you might just say that we really want to know what's on the phone, and we're going to limit it to this particular set of applications. So the right MDM tool can manage all of that for you.
So here's a question. How are you dealing with the whole iPhone App Store scenario to where they have to have their own Apple ID to log in? And how do you manage apps in that environment in a closed software infrastructure like the iOS, which is the Apple iPhone operating system? That also applies to the iPad kind of scenario. How are you managing that scenario to where that, like for example, in my environment, we have a single login that I control for all of our corporate phones, and nobody knows the password except for me and my operations director. So they're not allowed to download and install their own apps unless they get approval on it. So that kind of goes along to that, and then so that's the first part of the question that I have. That's just a personal question more than anything because I'm interested in that personally.
Yeah, you're right. The world of application management is more difficult with Apple because of the closed methodology they have towards publishing apps and the fact that they want to run it all through iTunes. That MDM can't get you past that. There's things once once the application's there, then the advantages kind of begin, but you do have to continue using that process to publish applications.
Okay, so it's basically the same scenario. It's just a matter of, and I think the way that we do it internally here is pretty solid. It's at least tight enough to where we have a policy and then we have apps that they're allowed to use and allowed to install. The rest of them they're not. And if they don't like it, get your own damn phone. That's the way I look at it. And is that something reasonable, or what do you think on that?
It's completely reasonable, absolutely, and that's actually a pretty standard way of defining your policy around applications.
Okay, well that's good. I will say I think there's a huge market for this in the school environment. We manage a bunch of schools, and all of them, nobody issues their staff phones because they don't have money for that, but all the teachers want access to email, and all the teachers want access to files over their phones, and want access to VPN and all this different stuff. So to me, I feel like there's a lot of gray area in the school environment because they're a municipality, so they're bound by government control. For example, they have to archive email, and they're bound there because they're a public entity scenario like that. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it does make a great case for MDM, especially in schools where also you have students using maybe tablets in certain circumstances. So you're going to have email completely disabled on the student devices while the teachers need to have it and want it. So you have a need to break up your policy groupings much differently for those two different groups, and MDM can help do that.
Okay, that's good. You and I can talk a little bit offline on that one because I'm interested in that. So, okay, what is the whole scenario with the take advantage of bulk application pricing? Can you talk a little bit about that and where that comes into play? Whether that's just an Android feature, how that relates to iPhones, and then also moving into now Microsoft's launching their new Windows App Store with Windows 8 and Windows Phone 8.
Yeah, you may know as much, Chris, as I do about the bulk application pricing. We haven't gotten too much involved in this. I do know that depending on how which applications and how many seats you're willing to commit to, there are advantages here that we can help you get. But I don't have too much background to be able to elaborate on that.
Okay, I know that I can say most of the time what you're going to see in a bulk application environment is going to be related to where it's a free app on the iPhone or the Google Play Store, and then you have to pay for the access to it because it's login based. And that's where they can control the group scenarios. I know of multiple programs that are that way, so I think that's more of how that relates to it. It would be seen as a free app on the App Store. You download it, but you can't do anything but log into a web interface through it. So all it becomes is kind of a portal. So, okay. The one thing I do like about application management is that whole version management scenario. So just to clarify this for the end users, basically what the version management means is instead of having 6 different versions of, let's say, Angry Birds on 6 different phones, it helps to sync those Angry Birds versions to have all the same version. Am I accurate on that?
Oh yeah, and you can run an audit
Okay.
report right out of MDM that says, tell me everybody that's not at least on this version or more current, and right there you've got in hard writing saying these guys aren't current. You know, who cares about Angry Birds? But you know, I've seen even divisions of the government worried about filing a particular application that deals with flight planning for their pilots, and that absolutely had to be current. And the only way you're going to make sure it's current is with some sort of automated tool that can help you there.
Yeah, and what's cool about cell phones, and you know, tablets aren't so cool this way, but cell phones are great this way because with the fact that they always have that internet on scenario in the smartphone world, they're almost always reachable by a software infrastructure. Most of the time, one of the things that we struggle with in our mass PC management world is the user shutting the damn machine off. You know, that becomes a problem because they shut the machine off when they leave, even though they're not supposed to, and then we can't work on the machine at night. That's when we do our work. So nice thing about the cell phones is they're always on, pretty much. So.
Yep.
Okay, well let's go ahead and move on slides here and get back to my clicker. So let's talk a little bit about the recommended approach, and I think we're spot on in this and one of my big things that I talk about in every one of the talks and scenarios that I talk about is how important policy is, actually having that policy in place and then moving down from there. So let's talk a little bit about this. Obviously, I think you agree with that too because it's number one on your list. But let's talk a little bit about the policy and where it goes from there.
Yeah, I think too many organizations try to jump this one, and it really you can't successfully deal with this problem if you've jumped the policy conversation. So we really see organizations in 3 different states. One is they don't have a policy at all. That's fine. There's standard policies that if you want our help, we can bring to bear. There's other ways to start the process if you don't want our help, but somehow you need to get that done. We see others that have a very mature policy, and those ones can, you know, from there move on to the next step. But those are fewer and far between. The most common, though, is somebody that's kind of got a policy started, doesn't really know how to finish it, and doesn't really know where to go to take the next step. So we need to make sure that that particular area is all addressed before we move forward. It's a little more difficult, too, in mobile security because sometimes technology dictates a little bit of the policy, whereas in other areas you wouldn't let it. But sometimes you're going to be looking at, okay, you know, BYOD, who do I have doing what? Is that working? If it is, I may sort of create a policy around the fact that, you know, I now know that my users who are bringing their own device are actually functioning properly, and I can live with that. So you've got a little bit of back and forth to solidify policy here, but regardless of how it gets done, it needs to get done before you start sniffing around about what kind of software to buy.
Yeah, I definitely think, you know, in every scenario, policy is absolutely that driver. It's just so key because at the very least, you have something in writing that you can stand behind. I know in our environment we have that here for our people that have phones. So, and then I think moving on to understanding that actual operating environment is a big deal too. Understanding how many total handsets you have, whether or not you have BYOD, whether or not you have company-owned phones. Any thoughts on that you could expand on for me?
Yeah, there are some things about the environment that we help clients think about too. You know, a lot of it geared towards are you more acclimated to adopt some sort of hosted solution, or are you more acclimated to run something on premise, and that'll help narrow the field down to potential solutions by a lot, just knowing the answer to that. When we combine that sort of environmental discussion along with how complex you are and what your security goals are, those are the 3 main things that'll help us really narrow down to say, okay, you should be looking at A, B, or C, and it's never more than the 3. We can get it down that far for them just by going through those kind of the 3 points of the triangle.
Yeah, and that kind of moves on to that next thing with understanding the user needs, and all those top 6 or 7 items are going to help you decide if that you need an actual mobile device management. Now, my personal opinion is if you have a phone other than the owner's phone, you should be doing some type of mobile device management. That's my personal opinion. Even, you know, some companies come in and be like, hey, we only got 4 phones. We don't need to worry about this. Yeah, until you have a problem, you know. And it also depends on, you know, it's a wild card and a variable that people do not understand how big it is. If you have an iPhone that's not password protected and it's left in the environment and you have a VPN set up into your company, it's wide open. It opens up your entire world. Am I accurate on that?
Yeah, no, that's true, and for that reason, you're right that if you have more than a few phones, you're probably going to want to do this from an ease of management point of view. And if you have even a few, if you're in that I don't have many phones group, then you might want to do it from a data sensitivity point of view. But if you don't hit on either of those, there's a chance that you don't need to do anything, and there's no reason to be scared into making a decision that you don't need to make. It doesn't happen a lot, but there are, I think, some organizations that buy more than they need here out of fear. So part of the job of anybody who's getting involved in consultation around this is to steer people clear of a bad buy as well.
Yeah, that's. I agree with that. It's sometimes a little bit of overkill. Although I personally would rather see overkill than nothing. That's just
absolutely. No, you're right. A lot of this is an insurance policy, right? You may never have that watershed event that could bring your company down, but if you did have it, you'd sure want to have a solution that could deal with it, and you'd sure want to be able to show any interested parties that you did everything in your power to go through all the steps of due diligence to make sure you address those potential concerns.
Yep, I agree with that. So, okay, so let's also talk a little bit about expense management. I think we covered a good amount of mobile device management. One thing I'm going to back up 1 second. One thing I would probably want to say on that, just an overview statement probably would be in a scenario where we're doing. I think it just takes, if you have cell phones in your environment, or smartphones is probably a better way of looking at it. Not many people have the flip phone. I think my dad has a jitterbug, but that's about, if it's a smartphone environment, I think a good overall thing to do is look at your scenario. We're going to be having an offer at the end of this webinar. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. That's what we're here for. We engage Scott from the ELSA group. We work together on these things. So if you have more than one smartphone in your environment, it's definitely a good idea to take a look at it and at least ask some questions. Do you think that's a good overall statement?
I do.
Okay, so let's move on to expense management then. And go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, I mean, this is the next step in sort of the logical thinking process of, let's say, the CIO or the person who's really concerned with this issue. Is they kind of go through that security concern, and they know they got to address it, and their house might be on fire, and they got to put that fire out. And then once they do, they kind of say, holy crap, this is costing me a lot. How can I make sure that I'm not getting, not paying too much for what I'm using here? And there's a few things that contribute to that being a problem. We know that billing systems are inaccurate. The bigger the carrier, the more inaccurate they are. And I don't want to spend time doing it, but I have a background in doing some IT work for billing for one of the major LECs that's in the Midwest, and the number of billing errors is so staggering you wouldn't be able to believe it. And when they occur, 85% of the time billing accurates go against the client. They can go against the client to a very significant degree. We also know that these organizations, these carrier organizations, are sales-driven. They sell through agents. When you add it all up, clients are over-provisioned. They've got too much. They've often been sold the wrong things based on how they use their technology and how things are routed. All of these things kind of contribute to one big problem, which is you're paying too much, and if someone wants a percentage, you're probably paying too much to the tune of about 25 or 30% in most organizations for the exact technology that you need. So it's not about cutting you back. It's not about switching to another carrier. It's not about using different device types that aren't going to be as nice to use. It's just about paying less for what you've already got.
So you're talking about not only the wireless or cellular services, but we're talking about voice and data, which is like your standard cell phone or your standard phone line and your standard internet lines and all those kind of things in play. And I will give a personal reference to this scenario. We just I audit my own stuff pretty often, being money. I try and be as money savvy as possible. Small business, you're not always, you're not loaded all the time for the most part. But one of the things that I did recently was I went back and called AT&T, and even though it was under agreement with 4 phones, I said, hey, what do you guys have that's new? And that's the deal. Just call and ask. And I saved $110 a month on 4 lines just because AT&T has activated a new policy that I was able to take advantage of. So that gives a good example of why you want to look at these things on a regular basis, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Well, we'll go ahead and move forward. Do you have anything else that you want to mention? What kind of, actually, I got a quick question. What kind of auxiliary services would you be bringing up in that scenario?
It can be different for everybody, but the ones that fall into this category most commonly are conferencing services, video conferencing, pagers. Those are the types of things that could go into there.
People still have pagers?
Yeah, medical facilities do. It's because you can't always guarantee cell service within the confines of certain medical buildings, and the pagers don't have any interruption. But it is kind of comical when you still see them.
Yeah, that's probably the only people I see it on as doctors. I think that's about it these days. So I used to have one for the company, but I don't anymore. So okay, that's a good point. And, okay, let's. I think you talked a little bit about that already. I probably don't have to revisit this slide just because you talked a little bit about that. But one good point on there is 85% of the time it's against the client, so that's a very good point. So. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some solutions and what things can be put into place for that. So why don't you go ahead and just elaborate a little bit on this for me.
Yeah, when we talk to people about this, almost always they say, look, I've got people looking at this internally. So we actually, if someone came to us and said, will you help us with this, we would prefer that they're looking at something internally because they'll know that anything that is done by us is above and beyond their own best efforts. But I can promise you, because of the types of records that you need to order and the language that they're written in, there's no way your internal effort can get everything. You might be able to do some things. You won't be able to get it all, and for that reason, an outside audit from someone that has been at this a while is advisable probably every 2 years. You don't even have to do it that often if you have some sort of ongoing expense management solution in place. But if you're just going kind of the audit project and stop and end route, every 2 years is about right. People can also start negotiations very early. The LECs tend to be very, well, let's talk about like AT&T is the LEC in our area here in the Midwest. So they tend to be very slow to respond, and as a negotiation or contract date comes near, they get slower and slower. That what they want to do is to be able to, they want to sway the negotiating leverage in their in their favor. So starting early and then gathering benchmarking data, which basically says for companies who are my size in my industry and roughly look like me, what is the best pricing my carriers actually have given somebody? I don't want to just hear what they tell me. I want to know what they've actually done.
So you've been mentioning the word LEC a lot. Can you just I know there's LEC, there's also CLEC. Can you just kind of talk just elaborate just real quick on what a LEC and what a CLEC is so people understand that?
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, I shouldn't have gone right there.
No,
but LEC stands for LEC stands for local exchange carrier, and the way telecom is set up is because it's sort of a natural monopoly, if you will. It doesn't make sense to give the right of way to do things like putting up lines and digging tunnels and laying fiber to more than one company in any one geographic area. So the way the government sort of regulated this is they said we're going to give it to one company in any one geographic area, but the way we'll ensure that there's competition is we'll let the CLECs, which stands for competitive local exchange carriers, and also some other resellers that aren't even officially CLECs, to be able to buy those services from the LEC and resell them in bulk. And so if you're here and you get a new phone line in Milwaukee, you could buy it from a number of different sources. Behind the scenes, you're getting AT&T service, and it just matters where you buy it from. And so that's sort of how the LECs and the CLECs work together.
Yeah, so but one thing on that is it's only allowed pretty much on the business-to-business side, that people can't go in and buy wholesale lines on the residential side. That's correct, right?
That's true. There are some additional options other than buying direct from the LEC on the local side, but this kind of savings and the different options that you'd see that you can leverage to your advantage aren't nearly as great as they are on the corporate side.
Gotcha. Yeah. And
but then again, the pricing's different. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. One thing people bring up on that is, well, so I have Time Warner Cable, or I have Comcast, or I have Charter at home, and one thing you have to remember on that is if you, and again, we're not talking about home stuff that much, but just to give everybody some clarification on that, that is a completely different infrastructure, so it's not bound by the same rules. For example, with cable, they're allowed to do that because it's over their coax network. Is that accurate?
It is. So you've got cable companies, you've got data companies, internet companies, and also traditional voice companies. All are capable of carrying your voice signal and could be potentially good solutions for the right client. And that's another area we'll help people weed through is you hear about voice over IP and isn't it great? It's great for everybody, and it could be good for you and it might not be, and it also comes in about 15 different flavors. So those are all things that we can help clients decide as well.
Yeah, we have a lot of people that just mention to me, well, I saw this awesome Vonage commercial for $14.99 a month. I get unlimited everything. But what you get is what you pay for, basically, in those scenarios. So it's really important to make sure that you're putting a business-grade service in for your business. It's one thing to save money, but it's another thing to lose service entirely. I was literally at a nonprofit about physically there like 3 weeks ago, and they had Vonage in place, and I was, we can't figure out why our fax doesn't work. Well, it's because you're sending it through a Vonage line that's a piece of crap, pretty much.
No, that's right, and there's a big difference between voice over IP and voice over internet. So when people hear voice over IP, they think that they're using the public internet. In many cases, you're just using an internet protocol, but you've got secure lines and you've got a quality of service that you can control. If you're using a service like Vonage or Magic Jack or something, you can't control the quality of service, and you're taking so many hops on the public internet that you're eventually going to have some kind of call degradation. So that is true.
Yeah, and that's a whole other hour-long discussion that we could talk about. That stuff that I actually have a lot of background in, because we actually have a complete voice over IP system here at our office, but we are on what's called a SIP trunk, and we have some very high-end stuff here. And I think the general misnomer is that people think, oh, I'll just do, they bundle VoIP into one giant block and assume it's all the same. So you're spot on with that. I agree with you. One thing I want to bring up real quick on here, you talk about begin negotiations early and some other billing internally. One thing that we see on a lot of business-to-business carriers is their expectation of clients to have really long terms. I'm not going to mention any names, but most companies that are out there with the three initials, like AT&T or TDS or some of these other ones, really push for the 5-year term agreement. I personally advise all my clients, don't ever sign anything that long, because what happens in 5 years in the internet and telephone world, I mean, what happens in the real world in 5 years, let alone in the technology world in 5 years. What's your thoughts further on that?
Contracts are really tough to read, and one of the components of the contract that's absolutely critical is what are the termination penalties if you choose to get out early. Some of the carriers have good termination clauses that are favorable, others have really poor ones, and others have ones that are impossible to understand. So that's something we would never advise on a length of a contract without our client understanding what the ramifications are if they want to get out early, but sometimes they have to get out early, and we want to make sure they're protected and not locked into something they can't live with.
Yeah, we just had a client that we literally sat down with. It's a brand new client that came on with us. They were all excited because they were thinking that they'd be able to get out of their current DSL agreement that they have with the local CLEC. And it turns out that somebody internally signed a 5-year agreement with them to keep them on a 768 by 768K DSL plus their phone lines, and it's a $500 a month plan for 6 phone lines and DSL when they could get 1/3 the price through a competitive carrier.
Oh, wow.
But it's just one of those deals that you're shaking your head at them, and that's something that we offer as well with our existing clients. So it's good stuff to think about and to talk about in depth, because a lot of business owners and decision makers don't think about those things. So let's move on a little bit. How you can actually determine mobile device management is the right solution for you. Something that Tech Squad IT with the ELSA Group is offering today as part of our webinar is a free mobile device assessment. It's just about a $600 value. We will do a 15-point assessment of your current mobile device environment. We'll also look at your phone bill and look at your current spend. We'll look at your current mobile policy, which for the most part I'm assuming is probably going to be non-existent for most people. We're also going to obviously look at that current cost analysis of your current mobile spend and your, if you want, and your actual landline spend and data spend as well. And we'll also make sure we look at your security. We'll do testing and review on that, and then we'll go through that mobile policy and all the documentation that you're giving your staff. But for example, in my environment, my staff, if they have a mobile device from us, they have to sign a policy that's part of our handbook. It's an addendum that they have to sign. And then we'll help recommend the best solutions for you. Scott, do you have anything that you want to add on?
No, this sums it up well, and I think that there'll be a lot of value that we'll see people get out of this by just sort of understanding, putting some clarity around an area that they might not understand very well right now.
Yeah, and I think the big factor there is that knowledge is power. This is something that is very typically not a lot of attention is paid to telephone bills, and less is paid to their internet and cell phone bills. So I think it's a very good value. It's totally free. Some questions on how to sign up. You can sign up for this in 3 different ways. You can type your request into the text chat box on your screen right now through GoToWebinar. You can also send an email directly to sales@techsquadit.com, or you can call our office and talk to Amber, my trusty sidekick, who's sitting next to me, shaking her head as usual at me. You can call and talk to Amber at 262-798-0909. And one thing to remember, we're only going to be giving out 5 of these, so make sure that you get on. We only have so many resources between Scott and our team here, so make sure that if you're interested in this, get on the horn right now and get a hold of Amber, or just shoot an email in. You should be able to click on that link on your screen. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and move on. Just want to thank Scott for coming on today. Hey, Scott, what does that PMP mean? I thought for a second there it meant pimp, but
it's missing. Yeah, we're missing the I. I think it was just a typo. Is all it is.
Okay.
I went through the PMI Project Management Professional certification a few years ago, so I use that designation to, well, in recognition of that, and also because I don't like to come off as just an empty sales suit. I do have a background in doing quite a lot of implementation and the technical side of this as well.
So I don't have anything behind my name, so I guess I'm just an empty sales suit.
Right.
Way to bundle me in. Thanks, buddy. Okay, and you can also email Scott smatchett@theaelsagroup.com. There's Scott's contact number. Feel free to contact him. You can also call me. Amber, do we have any questions on today? She didn't see any. She said, okay. So, Scott, anything else that you want to discuss or talk about? We could talk about the weather, but it's crappy already, so.
Yeah, nothing to add specific, but to just thank you for having me on, and everyone who joined. Always happy to get an audience to talk through these things. It's fun to talk about, and hopefully it's an area that everyone agrees is of good importance right now.
I agree. And this webinar will be recorded. Actually, it's being recorded right now. This will be up on our website and also on Vimeo.com. You can search for Tech Squad. You can search AILSA Group. We'll have all those as keywords. That'll be encoded by the end of the week. All right, Scott, appreciate you coming on. Oh, actually, somebody's texting me. I think he's got a question. Oh, he just said that I'm a pimp. He just said that I'm a pimp too. It's one of the guys on the webinar. So I appreciate that, Dave. You're a good guy. So, all right, we'll go ahead and wrap up then. Scott, appreciate your time, and we will be doing this again. And I really appreciate your knowledge, and I think it was a good session and a good topic. So appreciate it, and thanks again for coming.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
All right, everybody, this ends today's call, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks. Amber, what is our call 2 weeks from now? Oh, we're going to talk about cloud services. So we'll have a really good topic 2 weeks from today. What's that date? You know about as much as I do. It's going to be the 27th, so a week after Thanksgiving, roughly. So I can't believe Thanksgiving's next week, Thursday. So, okay, sounds good, everybody. Thanks again for coming, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.